Hello everyone, welcome to Summi Talks. My name's Alec.
My name's Liam.
And today we're going to be talking about Creativity Inc.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go.
So on this episode of Summi Talks, we're looking at Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. What is it that initially drew you and got you interested into this book, and what lessons do you think you've drawn out of it?
Yeah, so I think, immediately with this book, what we're looking at is, it's a story of Ed Catmull, who's obviously the president of Pixar Animation, also Disney Animation. So really we're getting someone who has done excellently in, of course, the field of like creativity and producing creative pieces. But one thing that particularly drew me to kind of this book is the idea of like creative management, how we take, like what forces really stand in the way of creativity and how we sort of manage that creative process. That was something that was very interesting to me. How can we kind of persist with constantly producing excellent creative work and like being consistent? And I think that's the key, really, just being consistent in creative work. So definitely understanding the principles behind that was kind of the reason for diving in to this book.
That relates onto one of the headings where you talk about balance, and being balanced and the importance of that moving through life and being a creative individual. So yeah, what did you learn about balance from this?
It's a common kind of idea, but I think the key here what Ed Catmull was really talking about, which kind of was a unique perspective for me, is this idea of moving away from still idle concept of balance, which could be like not taking risk because you want to feel balanced and comfortable, but understanding that balance really comes from taking action, which is a bit like kind of counters more like kind of traditional ideas, and I quite like that. And because it is more realistic and more practical, that most of our lives we're not really staying still, we're doing a lot of things, and it's important to maintain balance within our actions and within what we do.
Yeah, it can be, I guess, quite interesting to know whether or not you are in balance, because there are some times where you're completely exerting yourself and you feel like this is amazing, I'm getting so much done, I'm so productive, but then you burn out, and that's probably quite common for the student.
Definitely. And like I said, the problem is with this idea of going like full on 100% and then burning out is that the time you lose because of the burnout, if you average that over the whole time period, including the time you're going like 100% and the burnout, overall it's probably you're not that productive. Like I said, we're kind of looking at it from a perspective of sustainability, and I know that's kind of like a buzzword, but like what you're doing in daily routine, if you can't sustain that, then you're unbalanced. And really looking at, like I said, to look at your life and think, where is the balance coming from? Again, like I said, I like this concept of dynamic, because it's looking at like what you do on a daily basis. Is that leading to an excessive amount of stress? Is it making you feel excessively like tired? And taking all those concepts and then kind of reflecting inwards. But one thing I think that is great about this book is talking about how bringing in other people to sort of help you with these issues, with these problems. Like when you're talking about the discussion of balance, it's not just, okay, what do I think about my balance? It's very good to be like candid and open with other people that you trust and you care about and you value their opinion, to sort of give you insights, and we like encouraging that sort of dialogue to talk about, like, if you don't feel balanced, then being able to express that, I think, is crucial with people, like I said, you care about, and people that can look at you allow people to really get an insight into your life, and that's critical, having someone else to come from like another place to kind of bring insight to your own life.
Yeah, I read about that, and honesty and being forthright. You prefer the term like being forthright, essentially, as opposed to strict honesty, and how they use that in Pixar. The way I initially read that, it kind of made sense to me, because if you're wasting a lot of energy being manipulative or bending the truth around something, and generally just not being honest and having to like manage all these social complexities, that's creative energy you're not using towards the actual solution, like trying to tackle the challenges.
Yeah, essentially, like, cultures which are like open, candid are essentially the ideal we're going for, and sometimes that can be hard. Like I said, it's difficult kind of, and I think it's because it's so difficult to be honest, especially in the workplace. That's why I like how Ed Catmull's kind of brought in this new term, because the problem, I guess, with honesty is not only the fact that it's difficult to attain. Like, imagine going into work and being absolutely honest about all your co-workers. You're not going to like some of your co-workers potentially, and just to be honest about that can be very difficult, and to be constructive about it as well. So that is a very complicated process. But one thing is, like, Ed Catmull's kind of making it easier by saying, let's not talk about honesty, but let's talk about candor. And the difference is, honesty kind of has a moral connotation. If I talk about, if you were to say, or if I was to say to you, you're dishonest, that's not just kind of looking at your like level of honesty. It's also kind of saying, well, I'm judging your character. I'm saying you're a dishonest person. And that's a kind of problem. I think no one can really take offense of like, oh, you're not being quite candid. Yeah, in some cases people are not candid with good reason. And it's kind of allowing us to speak more openly about this idea of like honesty and all the rest. And you see this kind of take off in various other movements, like the idea of like the mental health movement. People need to be more honest, and it's kind of looking at like the stigma of mental health and trying to reduce that. This is kind of looking at it in the same way. It's like, okay, there's maybe a problem with honesty. Honesty carries a lot of weight. It's kind of like a very big thing to deal with. All right, let's maybe switch. Let's switch the definition of what we're trying to achieve. Switch the problem and define it as candor. And that's a much easier target to attain. So then it's easier for people to be candid rather than it is to be honest. But at the same time, if you're extremely candid, then you're likely going to be very honest. So we kind of aim for the same thing, but like just by changing slightly the target, change slightly some of the wording, we can achieve. It's easier to achieve the targets we're after.
Yeah, I guess if you take honesty in its like most sterile form, you kind of end up with this like Sheldon Cooper character that's just very anal and brutal and not productive for anyone else around them. Yeah,
and that's definitely one thing. Is kind of we're not looking for like people just to constantly just kind of insult each other, but like it's kind of everyone being constructive. But at the end of the day, in the creative process, it's very important that people are candid with you and that are honest with you, because at the end of the day, if something's wrong, it needs to be addressed. The problem is that what happens in a lot of workplaces, and even just like, not even in the workplace, but in daily life, like, is for example, like, if your friend is terrible at singing, should you tell them or not? And in this case, my first opinion is like, you have to tell them, but it's kind of, the question of whether you tell them or not is one thing, but to how you tell them is a different thing. Because going about and saying like, look, you're a terrible singer, you should give up, they may be terrible at first, but it doesn't mean they're going to be terrible in the future. It's like, there could be progression there, but it's kind of like saying it in the right way. And sort of at Pixar, they use brain trust meetings, which are essentially every few months they gather the group together, like whatever various teams, people from various sort of outlets from Pixar, and they talk about, all right, people write down kind of like on these notes, and they give it to whoever's responsible for the various project, and they kind of talk through things, but like everything is constructive. So it's kind of like what we're saying is, if your friend's a terrible singer, you can't just say you're terrible. You have to be constructive. That's the main point. It's like, why are they terrible? Kind of give some, so like someone can come out of that meeting knowing, okay, we're not going quite right here, but we may be doing well on these certain things, but at the same time, the things I'm not doing quite well on, you kind of know your next steps. It's constructive. It's like, you kind of know why, and that's the most important. People having an understanding. Like, the way you present this feedback and it's not really it's more like feedback, and you know that everyone has the same goal, which is at the end of this, we're all trying to get better. And that's what it should never be like criticism out of spite or something negative. It's always for the positive. We're building towards something greater.
Yeah, so on the topic of starting out potentially, having to take that criticism to begin with, getting yourself going and then building towards something greater, that ties in pretty perfectly with the whole concept of the ugly baby and the hungry beast. So you like to explain those analogies and what they convey.
Yeah, sure. So we'll start off, I guess, with the hungry beast, because this is one thing, like in the book, it was kind of brought up in more of a company, so like business perspective, but the hungry beast is kind of what like the revenue drivers in a business. So it's like looking at the sales team, the marketing team, anything that's not directly like has to kind of sell the product in a sense. It's not really directly related to the creative process in production. And the problem with the Hungry Beast is that they like kind of when you get to like a large company, like, or you get to the stars where your company is quite large, like Pixar grew rapidly over this time period, is that eventually you're going to get to a point where sales and marketing are going to need movies to sell. But the creative process are not predictable. You can't say, oh, we're going to produce a movie every 6 months. You can try, but there are unpredictable elements that come into that, and you can't control those things. So what happens is you get a scenario where the Hungry Beasts always need to be satisfied. So they're always demanding that you produce things on time. They want to be able to market things easily. For example, like take character creation. Maybe if you work in like the marketing side of like the toys for Pixar, you want characters that would make good toys. That is your own interest. But the problem is of trying to constantly deliver to the Hungry Beast is like we kind of, and then this brings on to the point of the ugly baby. Anything that you start which is new, especially when you start trying things out for the first time, it's probably going to be terrible. It's going to be rubbish. And like this happens at Pixar, and it's kind of like to reaffirm this whole like creative process is that even at Pixar, when we see the great movies, like they all started terrible. They were rubbish when they were first out. Like the storyline was all over the place. Maybe the animation weren't as good. It all started off on like rough storyboards. Like when you see the finished product, that's very far away from what they started off with. And this idea for many people is that I think a lot of people are very worried when they start something new because you're comparing it maybe to a finished product, but you just need to understand that you don't have a finished product, you have an ugly baby that needs to be nurtured. And it's important to do that because if you kind of eliminate ugly babies, then creativity is dead. But if there's not enough like kind of Hungry Beast and there's too much ugly baby, what you have is projects that never really come to fruition. They kind of stay ugly babies. They don't really go anywhere. There's no real pressure to like move it somewhere. An example would be, let's say you really want to be like a famous like rapper or something like that. And then like being too much in the ugly baby stage is like never producing a song, never putting it out there, just constantly maybe recording stuff, doing little bits, but never putting something out there that people can kind of like give feedback on, and you just never really go anywhere. Then there's the alternative, which is like too much focus on the Hungry Beast. So this is like, and this tends to happen more in maybe companies, but even on the individual level, this is like saying creative organizations get to a point where they just need to just churn out content. It's like people need to see stuff, so you just churn out content, but it's of poor quality, of course, and then you kind of deteriorate the brand and it just goes downhill from there. So again, this comes down to a principle of like dynamic balancing between these two forces, the ugly baby and the Hungry Beast. And like I said, it's all about balance. It's not like the Hungry Beast is evil and the ugly baby is an extremely good thing. It's like two forces, opposing forces, I guess, that need to be in balance for like the creative process to work effectively.
Okay. And that, I guess, when you talk about balance, that really sort of applies when you're thinking about the whole aspect of randomness, because essentially if you're always perpetually moving into a completely random future where nothing is predictable and you're getting all these new challenges coming up, there's no way you can prepare for it all. It's not possible. So being balanced and having those set principles of just being forthright with every challenge that you come against is probably the best way to prepare yourself for something like that. But yeah, we'd like to speak more about the whole concept of randomness and how that affects the creative process.
Yeah, sure. And like randomness is everywhere. Like everyday life, like every minute, second, random processes are occurring. And I think one problem we have as humans with randomness is we don't really understand randomness. As humans, we like to assimilate patterns out of things, and the problem is some things are truly random, and what we do then as humans is you try to assimilate a pattern from it, but the problem is it's random. There are no patterns to it, and then we get miscontrived information, we make the wrong conclusions out of things. This tends to happen a lot kind of like in maybe like social science in particular, like economics. So it's kind of like understanding randomness and the purpose for it. I mean, just earlier, like we're doing this, but I'll bring an example in from Pixar, but like just earlier today, we're doing a bit of film, doing a bit of like, filming, speaking, whatever, and then everything was just wiped off the hard drive. Things like that, like I said, like, so like, things like that can happen. And then like, Pixar gave a really great example because, again, it was like things outside of their control.
Yeah.
So it's looking at how these things can affect it, and at the same time, you can't really be too stringent on process. Some things will happen, and it's kind of like you do it in the moment, but it's like you still have to be free.
Yeah.
In an ability, it's not like being so constructed, like this is how we solve this problem, because certain problems have differences, but as long as the underlying principle is the same. For example, with Pixar, what happened was, I think it was on the production of Toy Story 2. They had a huge like server that had all the data, and for some reason a command was put in that sort of wiped out the whole server. They don't know how it happened, don't know why this command was executed, but it happened. So basically what happened is this kind of whole program was erased. So when they found out, it's like too late to stop it, so they've realized that basically the whole of Toy Story 2 has been erased. There's millions of pounds on the line, and then eventually what they find out is that one like woman who was working from home, she actually had a backup of the movie because she was working on it from home. I think it was she was on maternity leave, so she had the option to work on it from home. Sure. And actually had the backup there on a computer. And what we're saying is like, it's very difficult kind of like to learn from those incidents. It's a very unique kind of incident, very like one-off, random. It's one of those catastrophic events. But one critical principle from that is like, we don't blame any individual. We're looking to solve the problem, but we're not trying to like kind of find the individual culprit, because problems like these happen. So kind of look, and like you take that and like looking at it from that perspective is like, the principle is, if a catastrophic event happens, I'm not looking for a scapegoat. I'm not looking for someone to punish or fire. It's like, can we solve this problem, and understanding that these events will happen. But then it kind of leads on, like Eric Campbell talking about like, yes, randomness. And I think one thing, critical point I really like was this idea of like stochastic self-similarity. And this is again leading on to more like, how does randomness affect like kind of the problems we encounter? So first of all, like stochastic self-similarity, what this is that if I was to break a branch off from a tree and hold it upright, it would look like a mini tree. And if I was to get a microscope and kind of zoom in into your like capillary system inside the body, take it like basically look inside your body, look at the capillary system, and you take out like microscopic sort of piece of the capillary system, it will look like a smaller version of the larger whole. Yeah. This happens a lot in nature. And basically what this is saying is small problems are essentially very similar to large problems. And what happens because of randomness is that throughout life, there'll be times when we encounter like small problems, and there are times when we encounter large problems, which are both out of our control. So like a small thing might be, like I said, you're getting ready to go out with your mates and you haven't like ironed your shirt, you haven't washed like the nice shirt you wanted to wear for that evening. Small problem, kind of like it may be a random like occurrence that you didn't really expect it, didn't really see it coming. And then you got large kind of like random events, which is like earthquake, tsunami, things like huge natural events which are like catastrophes, but again you have no kind of control. And probably I mentioned probably my earlier point is kind of like more random would probably be, to give a better example would probably be like when your car kind of breaks down. That's kind of more like random in that sense. It's nowhere near as bad as an earthquake or a tsunami, but it's still like kind of a problem at the time. And it's kind of looking at this like, because of randomness, all these things are likely to occur in some throughout your life. Yeah, depending on obviously earthquakes and depending on where you live, but like you're going to encounter major catastrophes. You're going to encounter probably very many like small problems. So how do you kind of build or like deal with the unknown? Because we don't forecast these things kind of coming. And one thing is kind of to look at small problems and large problems and say the principles you apply to both are the same. And that's critical, because what we do is that small problems they occur very frequently. So how you're kind of dealing with these small problems will kind of build up and will enable you to kind of deal with the big problems when they come along, and they will inevitably come along. So it's critical that you kind of look at small problems, how you're dealing with those. And the problem is that sometimes people are not worth, I don't have the time to deal with small problems. And I think in a business, and from a business perspective, Catmull was talking about allowing individuals in that business to take responsibility for problems. I think the problem with many businesses is that you have a group at the top, maybe the founders, CEOs, whatever, who try to take responsibility for all the problems in the business, where people kind of lower down maybe the hierarchy, have better authority, better knowledge of those problems, and are better able to tackle those, but we don't give them the responsibility to take them on. And just so, but kind of drawing back out from that is kind of looking at the key lesson here is that small problems, large problems, they're gonna happen, but the way you deal with small problems is a good reflection of how you deal with large scale problems.
That wraps up nicely. This week we talked about Ed Catmull's Creativity Inc. and all the different principles that you need to achieve and try and foster to be creative.
Thank you very much for watching. Like I said, let us know what you think about these Summi talks, and we're gonna get moving with more content soon enough. But yeah, like I said, let us know, and also check out thesummi.com, which obviously has a range of book summaries, including Creativity Inc. Hit the link below to take you straight to the Summi website. Check out all of those reviews, and like I said, share, do whatever you feel is necessary. But because, like I said, it's good to see the Summi tribe growing, and like I said, I'd like to see you part of that tribe as well. So see you soon. Wait, should you go in a different one? Was that too cheesy?
That should be the end of right there.